Xavier Rain stood at the wide window of his home in the suburbs of Austin, Texas, looking out over the hills tinged with the gold of the setting sun. He was 38, but he looked younger, broad shoulders, slightly tousled dark brown hair, gray hair at the temples, which he was not embarrassed about. His face, with sharp cheekbones and deep green eyes, could belong to an actor from old westerns, if not for the eternal shadow of fatigue that has fallen under his eyes in recent years. The owner of a small but successful construction company, R. Rain Builders, he was proud of the fact that he built his life from scratch without rich parents, without connections, only perseverance and instinct. The house he stood in was his creation, 2 stories, with wood trim and large windows overlooking the vast Texas expanse. This was his corner of the world, his fortress. Lyra Bell Starling, his wife, should have been next to him. She's 34 and still looks like she stepped off the cover of a magazine. Tall, with long legs and graceful posture, she wore her light red hair in loose waves that fell over her shoulders like trapped sunlight. Her eyes, bright blue, almost unnatural, could captivate anyone, and Xavier was no exception. Lorabelle was once a model, posed for local clothing brands, and even appeared in a couple of catalogs in Dallas, but she gave up the runway to pursue a career as an interior designer 5 years ago. Now she was creating spaces that were cozy, stylish, with a touch of bohemian chic, and her name was already beginning to resonate in the circles of the Austin rich. Xavier loved to watch her work. The pencil in her slender fingers slid across the paper, drawing the lines of future rooms, and she hummed something to herself, usually old Elvis or Dolly Parton songs. Their home was a reflection of their union, its practicality in strong walls and a secure roof, its taste in soft ivory sofas, paintings by local artists on the walls, and vases of dried flowers that she placed everywhere. It smelled of wood, and her perfume a light aroma of jasmine with a hint of vanilla. But in recent months, this smell has become less common in the air. Lorabelle was disappearing at work more and more often, returning late, tired and distant, and Xavier began to notice cracks in their ideal picture. He met her 7 years ago at a fair in Austin. It was a hot August day, the air shivered with heat, and the streets were filled with the smell of roasting meat and the sounds of country music. Xavier had just launched his company and came to the fair to take his mind off endless bills and drawings. He was standing at the lemonade stand when he saw her, Lorabelle, in a light dress with a floral pattern, with a straw hat in her hands. She laughed as she bought a small painting of a cactus from an old artist. Her laughter rang like a bell, and Xavier, without expecting it, walked up to her. "Is this for home?" he asked, nodding at the picture. A stupid question, but she turned around and looked at him with her impossible eyes. "Maybe," she answered with a slight smile. "What are you doing here? You look like you ran away from the office." "More like from under a pile of papers," he grinned. They started talking. Lorabelle turned out to be witty, with a slight mockery in her voice, but without arrogance. She said she came to Austin from Louisiana, where she grew up in a small town surrounded by swamps and alligators, dreaming of something bigger. Xavier shared his story, the son of a carpenter. He was used to holding a hammer in his hands since childhood, and now he built houses for those who could afford it. They spent the day together, walking among the tents, trying spicy tacos, and dancing to live music near the stage. By nightfall, he already knew that he would not let her go just like that. A year later, they got married. The wedding was modest but warm in the backyard of his friend's house, with garlands of light bulbs and fresh flowers that Lorabelle collected herself. She was in a white dress without unnecessary decorations. He was in a simple shirt and jeans. Then Xavier thought it was forever. Now he wasn't so sure. Lorabelle has changed in recent months. She began leaving home early and returning late, citing meetings with clients. Her phone, which used to lie open on the kitchen table, was now always on silent, face down. When he asked how things were at work, she answered briefly, with a forced smile, "Everything is fine, Zav, just a lot of orders." But her eyes avoided his gaze, and her voice sounded as if she was reciting a memorized role. Things got even worse in bed. Lorabelle used to be passionate. Her touches were like sparks that set the whole house on fire. Now she turned to the wall, citing fatigue, or simply fell asleep as soon as she touched the pillow. Xavier felt a cold that chilled him to the bone, not the kind that the Texas winter brings with its rare frosts, but the kind that is born inside when something collapses. He tried to talk to her. One day, over dinner steak and potatoes, her favorite dish, which he prepared himself, he asked directly, "Lyra, is something wrong? You're something different." She looked up from her plate, her fork suspended in midair. "I'm just tired, Zav. Work, you know," she said, and her lips twitched into a faint smile. "You think too much." But he knew that this was not so. Xavier was an observant man. Years of working with contractors and clients had taught him how to read people. Lurabelle was hiding something. He noticed little things, stains of red lipstick on the collar of her blouse, although she had not worn that shade for a long time. The smell of someone else's cologne, sharp and spicy, which hovered around her when she returned home. The way she quickly put her phone away if he entered the room. This evening he stood at the window, holding a glass of bourbon. It was getting dark outside, the hills were fading into twilight, and the house was quiet, too quiet. Lurabelle was delayed again. She called an hour ago. Her voice was hurried. "Zav, I'll stay for a meeting with a client. Don't expect me for dinner." He mumbled something in response, but everything inside tightened. Meeting with a client at 8 p.m. On Friday, he was no fool. Xavier finished his bourbon and placed the glass on the windowsill. His gaze fell on the framed photo, their first photo together, taken at that very fair. Lurabelle had her arm around his neck, her hat tilted to one side, and he was laughing, holding 2 glasses of lemonade in his hands. Everything was simple then. Now he felt that their life was like this glass in a window, transparent, but with a thin crack that was about to grow and break everything into pieces. He didn't know what to do. Talking didn't help, and asking directly meant risking hearing a truth he might not be ready for. The Texas evening fell over the Austin suburbs softly, like an old blanket, covering the hills with warm shadows. The wind drove ragged clouds across the sky, and somewhere in the distance, a lone owl screeched, foretelling the night. Xavier Rain drove home along the winding road, his pickup truck bouncing slightly over the potholes. The radio was quietly playing an old Johnny Cash song, the singer's deep voice intertwined with the noise of the tires, creating a rhythm that was soothing. Today, he decided to leave the site early. His construction company, our Rain Builders, was finishing the framing of a new house in the Lakeview area. The client, a wealthy lawyer from the city, demanded that the pace be accelerated, but Xavier trusted his instinct. It was better to do it conscientiously than to chase deadlines. He left the crew to finish the last beams and got into the car, feeling the fatigue seep into his bones. He wanted to go home to a hot bath, a glass of bourbon, and maybe Lyrabelle if she was in the mood to talk. In recent months, she had been as distant as the stars overhead, but he still hoped that it was just a temporary cold. Xavier was a simple man, but not a simpleton. Tall, with broad shoulders and hands rough from work, he looked like a man who could build a house with his bare hands, and so he was. His dark brown hair curled slightly at the ends, and his green eyes held a mixture of stubbornness and thoughtfulness. He rarely raised his voice, but when he spoke, people listened. Lurabelle once said that he looked like a cowboy from old films, not the handsome man from the glossy cover, but the real one, with a rough soul and a firm gaze. He liked it. He pulled into the driveway of their home, a 2-story, wood-paneled structure with large windows that Lurabelle had insisted on installing to feel spacious. Her car, a white sedan with tinted windows, was parked on the porch next to his old pickup truck. Xavier frowned. She said she would be at a meeting with a client until late evening. Maybe plans have changed. He turned off the engine and silence fell over him, broken only by the chirping of the cicadas. Taking a bottle of water from the passenger seat, he got out of the car and breathed in the cool air. The sky had already darkened, the stars appeared through the clouds, and the house seemed too quiet. Lurabelle usually played music when she was at home, something melodic, like Fleetwood Mac or Nina Simone. Today there was not a sound coming from the windows. Xavier shrugged. Maybe she was sleeping. Lately she had been complaining about being tired, although she didn't like to admit it. He walked up the porch steps, which creaked under his weight, and opened the door. The inside smelled of her perfume light jasmine and vanilla, but the smell was faint, as if she hadn't renewed it in a long time. Xavier kicked off his shoes at the entrance, threw his keys on the table in the hallway, and froze. Something was wrong. The silence seemed heavy, as if the air had thickened. He listened. From the depths of the house came a faint sound, rhythmic, muffled, like the beating of a heart. Xavier stepped forward, his socks sliding silently across the wooden floor. The living room was empty. The sofa with the cream pillows that Lurabelle loved so much stood untouched. The television was silent. There was no one in the kitchen either, only her purse lay on the table, carelessly thrown, with the edge of a notebook sticking out. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to push away the growing feeling of anxiety. Maybe she's in the bathroom, or in the studio where she drew her sketches. But the sound came from above. Xavier slowly walked up the stairs, the steps creaking slightly under his weight. His heart was pounding in his chest, although he himself did not understand why he was so nervous. The door to their bedroom was slightly open, a thin strip of light falling onto the floor of the corridor. He came closer, and the sound became clearer. A low moan, almost a whisper, interspersed with breathing. Lurabelle's voice was familiar, but not the same as when she spoke to him. Xavier froze at the door, his hand resting on the frame. He pushed the door a little harder, and it opened silently. The picture that opened before him struck him like lightning on a clear day. Lurabelle lay on their bed, the same one where they had slept together for 6 years, her light red hair spread out on the pillow, her eyes half closed, her lips parted in a quiet moan. She was wearing only a silk robe, open to expose her body, and a man leaned over her, tall, thin, with long black hair pulled into a careless ponytail. His hands moved over her skin, and he whispered something in a low voice that Xavier didn't recognize. Time has stopped. Xavier stood rooted to the spot, his mind refusing to accept what he saw. This was their bedroom, their bed, with the bedspread that Lurabelle had picked out from an antique shop 2 years ago, with the scent of their lives, their promises. And now there was someone else here, a stranger, whose fingers touched his wife as he had once touched himself. Lurabelle didn't notice him. Her eyes were clouded, her head was thrown back. She moved in a rhythm that Xavier knew all too well. Rage flared up in him, hot and blind, but he suppressed it. No, not now. Not like that. He won't burst in screaming, won't let them see his pain. Instead, his hand slowly reached into his jeans pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers were shaking, but he turned on the camera, switched to video, and pointed the lens at the bed. The screen captured everything: her moans, the stranger's movements, their bodies merging in a treacherous dance. He filmed silently, standing in the shadow of the doorway, his breathing even, although a hurricane raged inside him. The man turned his head, and Xavier saw his face, sharp features, stubble, piercing in the eyebrow. He didn't know who it was. Not a client, not a neighbor, not someone in their circle. Stranger. The stranger who destroyed his world. Xavier clenched his jaw so hard that his teeth ground together. He wanted to rush forward, rip the bastard off the bed, slam his face into the floor, but instead he kept filming. Every second, every sound. These were his weapons, not his fists, but proof. Lurabelle made a high, sharp sound, and Xavier turned off the recording. His hand dropped, and the phone went back into his pocket. He stepped back, slowly, silently, like a shadow. They didn't notice him, too absorbed in each other, too blind to the fact that he was standing 10 paces away. Xavier walked downstairs, his steps mechanical, like a robot's. He went out onto the porch, closed the door, and breathed in the night air, cold and sharp as a blade. Rage seethed within him, but now it was cold, calculating. He didn't know who the man was, but that didn't matter. Both of them, Lurabelle and this stranger, will pay. Xavier got into his pickup truck, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. A plan was already forming in his head, while the video on his phone lay heavy in his pocket, the first step towards making their lives hell. Xavier drove the pickup along a dark road, the headlights snatching silhouettes of trees and rare lights of distant houses from the darkness. Night enveloped the suburbs of Austin, and only the roar of the engine broke the silence. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white, and his mind replayed the scene he had left behind. Lyra Bell on their bed, her moans, strangers' hands on her body. The phone in his jeans pocket felt like a hot coal. The video he took was there, a silent witness to betrayal. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't return home. Not now. The road led him to the R. Rain Builders construction site in Lakeview, a place where he felt like he belonged. The lawyer's new house stood in twilight, its frame rising to the sky like the skeleton of the future. Xavier parked at the trailer that served as his temporary office and turned off the engine. Silence fell upon him, heavy and thick. He got out of the car, the cold wind hit his face, but he barely noticed it. The inside of the trailer was cramped, a table littered with blueprints, an old sofa, a coffee pot that hadn't been washed since last week. There was a smell of wood, dust, and his work a smell that always calmed, but not today. Xavier collapsed on the sofa without turning on the light. His gaze fell on the framed photograph on the table him and Lurabelle at the fair 7 years ago, her hat on one side, his smile wider than the Texas plains. He turned away. His thoughts were confused, rage fought with pain, but he forced himself to breathe evenly. He won't let them win. Lurabelle wouldn't let that bastard with the long hair see him broken. He will act, but not out of emotion, but with a cool head. He didn't know who the man was yet, but it was only a matter of time. He took out his phone and opened the video. The screen illuminated his face with a bluish light. The sound was muffled, but each moan from label cut like a knife. He watched as the stranger moved above her, as her fingers clung to the sheets, the same ones that he had laid out 1,000 times in the morning. Xavier turned off the recording after a minute, unable to watch any further. This was not just proof, it was the poison he would use. But not now. He put the phone on the table and closed his eyes. Sleep did not come, but he lay there until midnight, until fatigue took its toll. As the sky began to turn gray, Xavier stood up. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes were red, but he washed his face with cold water from the sink in the trailer and made coffee black, bitter, like his thoughts. He decided to stay at work all day, returning home knowing that Lyra Bell was more than he could bear, but he didn't want to give her any reason to suspect that he had seen something. Let him think that everything is as usual. Let him relax. The day passed in a mechanical routine. Xavier checked beams, gave instructions to the crew, spoke with suppliers on the phone. His voice sounded even, although everything was boiling inside. The workers, accustomed to his calm tone, did not notice anything, but one of them, an old carpenter named Hank, tapped him on the shoulder and asked, "Are you okay, boss? You look like you haven't slept in a week." "There's just a lot to do," Xavier waved it off, putting on a weak smile. "Everything is fine." He left the site only late at night. The stars hung over Texas like shards of glass, and the road home seemed endless. When he turned toward the house, the lights in the windows were no longer on. Lurabelle was apparently asleep. Xavier quietly entered, kicked off his shoes, and went up to the guest room. He couldn't sleep next to her, not after what he'd seen. He lay down on the narrow bed, looking at the ceiling, and allowed himself to exhale for the first time in 24 hours. Tomorrow he will start the game. Morning came with the smell of coffee and the sound of Lurabelle's footsteps in the kitchen. Xavier came downstairs, his face as impenetrable as a mask. He put on this mask deliberately, not a shadow of anger, not a hint of pain. Lurabelle stood at the stove, wearing a light robe, her red hair pulled back into a messy bun. She looked as always, beautiful, a little sleepy, with the slight smile that he had once loved. But now he saw the lie behind it. "Good morning, Zav," she said without turning around, stirring something in the frying pan. "You came back late yesterday. Job?" "Yes," he answered, sitting down at the table. His voice was flat, almost bored. "The customer is pressing. We had to stay late." She nodded and placed a plate of eggs and bacon in front of him. Her movements were familiar, but Xavier noticed how she avoided his gaze. Her blue eyes slid over the table, over the cup of coffee, but did not meet his green ones. He ate in silence, watching. Lurabelle chatted about small things, about a new client who wanted something ranch style, about the weather, about how the air conditioner needed to be cleaned. Her voice sounded light, but there was tension in it, like a string ready to snap. "Are you late again today?" he asked, taking a sip of coffee. The question was simple, but he looked at her carefully, catching every little detail. "Probably," she answered, shrugging. "We need to finish sketches for one villa. Meeting in the evening." Lie. He knew it now. Her phone lay on the table, face down, as always lately. She used to leave it open, laugh at his inability to use apps, show him memes or photos from work. Now the phone has become her shield. Xavier nodded as if he believed it and stood up, putting the plate in the sink. "Don't overwork yourself, Lyra," he said, looking at her back. His tone was soft, almost caring, but inside he was clenching his fists. She turned around and smiled the same smile that she had once caught him at the fair. "Thank you, Zav. You too." He went to the bathroom to get ready for work, but not before stopping in the hallway. Lurabelle took the phone, quickly dialed something, and put it in her robe pocket. Her fingers trembled slightly, a small thing he wouldn't have noticed before. Now he noticed everything: how she fiddled with the hem of her sleeve, how her voice trembled on the word meeting, how she turned too quickly to the stove. A coldness he had not seen before was now evident. She lied to his face and did it masterfully. Xavier returned to the guest room where he had slept that night and sat on the edge of the bed. His mind was as clear as the morning sky. He will not make a scene. He will not rush at her with accusations. It would be too easy, too fast. No, he will watch, collect evidence, and wait. Video on your phone is just the beginning. He will find out who this man is and find a way to strike in a way that will make them both regret the day they decided to betray him. He stood up, put on a clean shirt, and picked up the keys to his pickup truck. Lurabelle was still in the kitchen, humming something to herself Elvis, as usual. Xavier walked out onto the porch, breathed in the morning air, and got into the car. The mask remained in place. He will play his role until the time comes to remove it. The midday sun hung over Austin like a hot copper disk, scorching everything that fell under its rays. Xavier Rain stood at a construction site in Lakeview, leaning against his pickup truck, watching workers haul logs as Buzz saws word. Sweat ran down his neck, soaking the collar of his shirt, but he did not move. His thoughts were far from the dust and heat. 3 days ago, he found Lurabelle with a stranger in their bedroom, and since then he wore a mask of calm, hiding the anger that was gnawing at him from the inside. Every morning he ate her scrambled eggs, nodded at her lies about meeting clients, and waited. Today he decided to take action. There was a phone in my jeans pocket, a silent witness to that night. The video he took was short but poisonous. Lurabelle, her moans, a stranger with long black hair and an eyebrow piercing. Xavier didn't know who he was, and it was driving him crazy. Lurabelle behaved as if nothing had happened. She smiled, hummed Elvis, and hid her phone face down. But he saw her lie in every gesture, in the trembling of her fingers when she took the cup, in the way she looked away. He needed the truth, and he couldn't look for it himself. The risk of frightening her away was too great. He needed a professional. Xavier pulled out his phone, scrolled through his contacts, and settled on the name Zenobia Crow, private detective. One of his contractors once mentioned to her, "A strange woman, but she will find anything. Just don't expect warmth from her." He dialed the number, gripping the phone until his knuckles turned white. "Crow," answered a hoarse voice after the second ring. "Xavier Rain." "I need your help," he said, trying to keep his tone even. "Rain, builder, right? I heard about your office. What's happened?" There was curiosity in her voice, seasoned with slight mockery. "Personal. We need to meet. Today." "Today, then?" "Well, you're impatient. Okay, come to Coyote Tail on 6th at 5 and grab coffee black without sugar. I don't drink their swill." She hung up without giving him time to answer. Xavier put the phone away and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Coyote Tail is a bar in the city center, noisy and smelling of tobacco. It was not his place, but for the sake of the cause he was ready to endure. At 5 in the evening, he pushed open the bar door, holding 2 glasses of coffee from the coffee shop across the street. It was cramped and stuffy inside. The smell of beer mixed with fried meat and old rock music blared from the speakers. I think it was ZZ Top. The crowd was buzzing, bikers in leather jackets, students with beer mugs, a couple of hippies in the corner. Xavier made his way through the noise and noticed her immediately. Zenobia Crow was sitting by the window at a small table, her legs crossed in torn jeans. She was in her late 40s, thin, with short black hair sticking out like porcupine quills. There were tattoos on his neck and arms, snakes, skulls, runes, faded with time. Her gray eyes, sharp as knives, glared at him as soon as he approached. "Are you Rain?" she said, looking him up and down. "Xavier," he nodded, placing the coffee in front of her. "Here's your black one." "Zenobia, sit down, don't stand there." She took the glass, took a sip, and winced. "Well, that'll do. Lay out what you have." Xavier sat down, the chair creaking under his weight. He looked at her, appraising her. Zenovia's face was hard, thin lips, a scar above her eyebrow, skin that had seen the sun and the wind. But there was a directness in her gaze that inspired confidence. She will not lie for money or create sentimentality. "I have a problem with my wife," he began, lowering his voice to drown out the noise of the bar. "Lorabelle, I found her with someone in our house." "Oh, a classic of the genre," she chuckled, tapping her nails on the table. "Do you want divorce photos, or just cry into your vest?" "Neither one nor the other," he snapped, clenching his fists under the table. "I want to know who he is, and what are they doing, whatever you can find." Zenobia leaned forward, her tattoos moved as if they came to life. "Interesting. And you're not one of those people who immediately punches you in the face, right? Tell me what you saw." Xavier hesitated, but decided to show the cards. He pulled out his phone, opened the video, and handed it to her. "Here, see for yourself. I filmed this 3 days ago." Zenobia took the phone, her eyebrows went up. She turned on the recording, and although the sound was off, the picture spoke for itself. Lyrabelle on the bed, her red hair spread out, her silk robe open, and above her a man with long black hair pulled back into a ponytail, his eyebrow piercing, glinting in the dim lamplight. Zenobia looked silently. Her face did not tremble, only her fingers lightly squeezed the phone. "Well, well," she said finally, returning the device to him. "Your Lurabelle wastes no time. Who is this clown with a tail?" "I don't know," Xavier replied, putting the phone away. "That's why I need you. I don't know him, I haven't seen him before. I want you to find out who he is, where he came from, what he has with her." "What does she say?" Zenobia leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "He's lying. Smiles, prepares breakfast, talks about work. I pretend to believe." She nodded, something like approval flashing in her eyes. "Smart move. Let him think that you are blind. Okay, I'll take it. But I need details. Where does she go? Who does he hang out with? Phone, habits, give it all." Xavier began to talk. Lurabelle is an interior designer at Starling Designs in downtown Austin. She often goes to meetings with clients, gets cinnamon coffee at a coffee shop on Congress Avenue, and sometimes drinks wine with her friends at the Rusty Anchor. She always has her phone on silent, and he doesn't know the password. Zenobia listened, scribbling in a battered notebook with a cover scratched like her hands. "And this guy," she interrupted, looking up. "Maybe he's from her work, client?" "I don't know," Xavier shook his head. "Not like the ones she usually deals with. But I want to know for sure." "Okay, I'll dig it up," she said, grinning. "I have connections. Prove that he is not a ghost, and I will find his name, address, and even his shoe size." Xavier looked into her eyes, his voice becoming harsher. "I need everything. On him who he is, where he lives, what he breathes, and on her what he hides, who else he communicates with. I want to know who I'm dealing with." Zenobia finished her coffee and threw the glass into the trash, can against the wall, an accurate shot, like in basketball. "It's agreed, Rain," she said, standing up. "1,000 in advance, the rest after. And don't ask how I work." Here, he said, pulling out the bills. The rest is tomorrow. Money is not an issue. Generous, she chuckled, taking the cash. I love those. I'll start with this guy with the piercings. I will prove that he is not a shadow, and I'll look at your wife too. Give it a couple of days. She slipped the notebook into the pocket of her leather jacket, nodded, and walked out, leaving behind the smell of cigarettes and cheap cologne. Xavier watched her leave, feeling the tension ease slightly. Zenobia was strange tattoos, hoarse voice, harshness in every movement, but she had the strength that he needed. He showed her the video, and now she knew where to start. This was his first step. He finished his coffee, threw a couple of dollars on the table, and went out into the evening Austin. The city was noisy, but inside Xavier there was silence cold as steel, ready for the next blow. The morning in Austin began with thick fog that hung over the hills like smoke from a fire. Xavier Rain stood at a construction site in Lakeview, leaning against his pickup truck, watching workers unload a load of lumber. The air was damp, saturated with the smell of earth and pine trees, but Xavier felt neither freshness nor peace. 2 days had passed since he hired Zenobia Crow, and each of these days dragged on like a year. He didn't want to go home to Lurabelle, to her lies, to their bedroom, where the ghost of that night still hovered. His job became his refuge, and his pickup truck became his temporary bed. He slept in a trailer on site for the second night in a row. The couch there was hard and smelled of dust and old coffee, but it was better than lying next to Lurabelle, knowing that she was sleeping with someone else. He dropped her calls, answering with short messages. I'm delayed. Work. She didn't insist, but he felt her patience melting away. Xavier spent the morning checking the drawings and giving instructions to the team, but his thoughts were somewhere far away in the Coyote Tail Bar, where Zenobia promised to find the truth. She was supposed to call today. By midday, the fog cleared and the sun hit full force. Xavier was sitting in the trailer, sipping a cold bottle of water, when his phone vibrated. Lurabelle, he hesitated, but answered it was impossible to ignore it for too long. Zav, where are you? Her voice was soft, with a slight hint of irritation. At the site, he said, looking out the window at the workers. Lots of things to do. For the last few days you've been doing nothing but at the facility, she remarked. What's happened? Why are you almost never at home? The customer is pressing Lyra. We need to finish the frame by the end of the week. His tone was even almost bored, but everything inside was shrinking. You've never disappeared like this before, she said after a pause. I see something is wrong. Do you even sleep normally? Xavier gritted his teeth. She plays caring, while she hides her phone and lies about meetings. I sleep as much as I can, he answered. Don't worry, I'll be late today too. Okay, she sighed, but at least you eat normally. I'll leave dinner in the refrigerator. He mumbled something in response and hung up the call. Her words, something is wrong, echoed in my head. She's right, but she doesn't know how much. Xavier threw the phone on the table and rubbed his temples. The house he built for them became a cage for him. Every time he crossed the threshold, he saw her with that man long black hair, eyebrow piercing, whispering in the dark. He couldn't be there anymore. In the evening, when the sun dropped to the horizon, painting the sky crimson, the phone vibrated again. This time Zenobia. Xavier grabbed the phone, his heart pounding. Rain, it's me, she said hoarsely. There is news. Where are you? At the Lakeview site, he answered, standing up. What did you find? Come to Coyote Tail. In 1 hour. Grab a beer, my throat is dry. She hung up. Xavier cursed to himself. This woman loved to command, but grabbed the keys and drove off. An hour later, he was walking into the bar, holding 2 cold bottles of Lone Star. Zenobia was sitting in the same place, by the window, in her leather jacket and torn jeans. Her tattoos glinted in the light of the neon sign, and a folder of papers lay on the table. Quickly, she chuckled when he sat down opposite. Give me a beer. Here, he said, placing the bottle in front of her. What do you have? Patience, Rain. She took a sip of beer, wiped her lips with the back of her hand, and opened the folder. I did some digging. Your Lurabelle and this guy with a tail are not a random couple. Xavier leaned forward, his fingers gripping the bottle. Who is he? His name is Talula Graves, said Zenobia, pulling out a photo. 40 years old, a former rocker, now owns the Black Raven Bar on the outskirts of the city. The picture was of him thin, with long black hair in a ponytail, eyebrow piercings, sharp cheekbones. Xavier recognized him instantly. The same bastard from the video. His heart began to pound, but he forced himself to listen. How long have they been together? He asked, his voice low, almost a growl. More than a year, answered Zenobia, leafing through the papers. I traced her. They meet regularly at his bar, in out-of-town motels, even at your home when you're at work. I have a photo if you want to look. She pushed a couple of pictures towards him. Lurabelle and Talula in an embrace at the entrance to the Black Raven, she laughing, he whispering something in her ear. Xavier clenched his fists until his nails dug into his palms. More than a year, he repeated, looking at the photo, and I didn't notice anything. She's cunning, Zenobia shrugged. Knows how to play. But that's not all. What else? He looked up, his gaze heavy. She's preparing a divorce, said Zenobia, pulling out a printout. I found the correspondence. Not directly, of course, it is encrypted, but I connected with one guy. He hacked her email. Lurabelle consulted a lawyer a couple of months ago. I want half of your company, Xavier. He says you are being emotionally crushed and wants to make you feel guilty. Xavier froze. His company, our Rain Builders, was his life, built from the ground up. He worked day and night to get her out of debt, and now Lurabelle wants to take half of it. This is true, he asked, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. Here is the evidence. Zenobia pushed the piece of paper towards him. Email to lawyer. She hasn't served it yet, but is getting ready, and Talula knows he helps her. Xavier took the paper. There was a letter from Label. We need to collect evidence that he is unbearable. I want to get the maximum during the division. He read, and every word was like a blow from a hammer. Are they planning this together? He asked, looking at Zenobia. It seems so, she nodded. Talula is not just a lover. He is her advisor, maybe even teasing. His bar is barely holding up. He's up to his neck in debt. I think he's counting on her to get him out at your expense. Xavier leaned back in his chair, his beer bottle untouched. More than a year. Divorce. His company. He looked at the photo of Talula, and only one question was running through his head. How could he be so blind? Are you sure? He asked finally. As in, the sun will rise tomorrow, Zenobia chuckled. This is just the beginning, Rain. I can dig deeper. Want. Come on, he said, clenching his jaw. Whatever you can find. On him, on her. I want to know everything. It will be done, she nodded, finishing her beer. But it costs more. Another 1,000, and I'll continue. I'll bring it tomorrow morning, he answered without hesitation. Just dig. Zenobia collected the papers into a folder, stood up, and patted him on the shoulder. Hang in there, Rain. You're strong, you can handle it. I'll call when there's more. She left, leaving him with a folder and a cold beer. Xavier sat looking out the window at the lights of Austin. He won't go home, not today. Lurabelle is waiting for him with dinner, but he won't be able to look her in the eye knowing that. He took the photo of Talula, clenched it in his fist, and put it in his pocket. Now the enemy had a name. Xavier Rain has long forgotten what sleep without nightmares is. Every night his mind returned to the bedroom, to Lurabelle, her red hair on the pillow, to strangers' hands sliding over her body. A week had passed since Zenobia Crow brought the first evidence, and every day he sank deeper into the cold rage that he hid under a mask of calm. He was almost never home, sleeping in a trailer at a construction site or in a pickup truck parked on the side of the road. Work became his shield, and loneliness a strange consolation. Lurabelle called less often. Her voice sounded increasingly strained on the phone, but Xavier gave her no reason to suspect that he knew. He waited while Zenobia dug deeper. This morning he was sitting in a cafe on the outskirts of Austin, a small place with peeling paint on the walls and the smell of burnt pancakes. The construction site was left behind, and he chose this place to escape from the noise of saws and the sound of hammers. There was a glass of black coffee in his hands, already cold, but he didn't drink, he just swirled it, watching the circles on the surface tremble from his movements. A week had passed since he learned the name Tulliolo Graves, former rocker, owner of the Black Raven Bar, lover of his wife. For more than a year, they met behind his back, planned a divorce, and wanted to take away half of his company. These facts burned him from the inside, but he kept himself under control. Bye. The phone lay on the table, face down, like a time bomb. Zenobia promised to call when she found something new. Xavier gave her another $1,000 3 days ago, pushing the money into her tattooed hand in the same coyote tail. She grinned then, saying, "I'll give you more than just a name, Rain. Give me time." And he waited, although his patience melted like ice in the Texas heat. Lurabelle asked again last night why he was so rarely at home. They ran into each other in the kitchen. He went to get some clean clothes. She was preparing pasta, humming something under her breath. Her blue eyes glanced over him, and she said, "Zav, you are completely lost. What's wrong with you?" "Work, Lyra," he answered, opening the refrigerator to get water. "You know how it happens." "I know, but you used to spend the night at home, at least sometimes," she noted, stirring the sauce. "It's like you're avoiding me now." He froze. The bottle was cold on his fingers. Avoiding? She doesn't even know how close to the truth she is. "I'm just tired," he said, shrugging his shoulders. "We'll finish the project soon. It will become easier." "I hope so," she sighed, smiling that smile that once melted his heart. "I miss you, you know." Bored. The lies flowed from her so naturally that Xavier would almost believe it if he didn't know the truth. He nodded, muttered something about a shower, and walked away, leaving her with the pasta and her fake concern. The phone vibrated, bringing him out of his memories. Xavier grabbed him. "Zenobia." "Rain, where are you going?" she asked hoarsely as soon as he answered. "At the cafe on 3rd Street, he said, straightening up. "What do you have?" "There is something interesting. Come to Coyote Tail. Now, and grab some cigarettes, I'm running out." She hung up. Xavier cursed under his breath. This woman and her commanding habit were starting to get on his nerves, but he stood up, threw a couple of dollars on the table, and walked to the pickup truck. On the way, I dropped into a store, bought a pack of Marlboro, and half an hour later, I was already entering the bar. The evening was just beginning, but Coyote Tail was already humming. Rock from the speakers, the laughter of drunken bikers, the clinking of glass. Zenobia sat at her table, wearing a leather jacket and ripped jeans, her tattoos glistening in the dim light. "Quickly," she chuckled when he threw the cigarettes on the table. "Sit down." "Here are your cigarettes," he said, sitting down opposite. "What did you find?" "Patience, Rain." She opened the pack, took out a cigarette, and lit it, blowing the smoke into the ceiling. "I dug into the past of your Talula Graves. And let me tell you, this is not just a rocker with a guitar." Xavier leaned forward, his fingers curling into fists. "Spread it." "Okay, listen," she began, pulling a folder out of her bag. "Talula Graves, 40, originally from Houston. In the 90s, he played in some third-rate rock band, Grave Dogs. He traveled around the South, sang about freedom and whiskey, but did not become a star. About 10 years ago, the group broke up, and he settled in Austin. The Black Raven opened, but the bar is barely breathing debts, taxes, everything." "I already know that," Xavier interrupted. "What's new?" "Don't drive the horses," she snapped, blowing smoke in his face. "Here's what's interesting. In the 2000s, he hung out not only with musicians. I have old photos. Look." She pushed several pictures toward him. In the first one, Talula, younger, with long hair and a leather vest, stands next to two men in dark glasses. They are holding bags of something white, and an old van is visible in the background. In the second, he's in some basement, with a cigarette in his mouth, handing over money to a bearded guy with a scorpion tattoo on his neck. Xavier frowned as he looked at the photo. "What are these prohibited substances?" he asked, looking up at Zenobia. "What do you think?" She grinned. "It's not powdered sugar, Rain. Tallulo hung around with local merchants in the early 2000s. Small deals, nothing big, but he was in business. I talked to an old friend from Houston who remembers Graves. He says he carried dope for small gangs until he gave up, or he pretended to quit. Xavier took the first photo and ran his finger along the edge. Tallulah looked younger, but had the same eyebrow piercing, the same insolent look. "Do you have proof?" he asked, his voice low. Here, Zenobia pulled out another sheet. Old police report, 2003. He was detained for possession, but the case was hushed up. Either no witnesses were found, or he ratted someone out. Officially clean, but dirt remains. Xavier looked at the photo, and something clicked in his head. Prohibited substances. This was not just his wife's lover, this was a man with a past, with vulnerabilities. Leverage he could use. "Is he still in it?" he asked, looking at Zenobia. "I don't know yet," she shrugged. "His bar is drowning in debt, so maybe he's back to his old business. Or he simply lives on your money through Lurable. I can dig deeper if you want." "Dig," he said, clenching his jaw. "I need everything. If he's still involved with this, I want to know." "It will be for you," she nodded, putting out her cigarette on the edge of the table. "But it's not cheap. Another 1,000, and I'll check his connections." "I'll bring it tomorrow," he answered, without taking his eyes off the photo. "Just find me more." Zenobia collected the papers, put them in a folder, and stood up. "You're a tough cookie, Rain," she said, slapping him on the shoulder. "Hold on. I'll call." She left, leaving a trail of smoke behind her. Xavier remained seated, looking at the photo of Tallulah. Traitors, a past that could become his weapon. He put the photo in his pocket, finished his beer, and walked out into the night. He won't go home, not today. But now he had a plan, and that plan was beginning to take shape. Xavier Rain woke up to the sound of his own breathing, harsh, intermittent, as if he were running in his sleep. He was lying on a hard sofa in a trailer at a construction site. The blanket had slipped to the floor, and it was already dawn outside the window. A week had passed since Zenobia showed him the photo of Tallulah Graves as a merchant, and since then his mind had been working like a machine, forming a plan. He knew he had leverage against Lurabelle's lover, but it wasn't enough. He needed time to gather more to strike, for sure. And to do this, he decided to return home not as a broken husband, but as an actor playing his best role. He sat down, rubbing his neck, which was stiff from the uncomfortable position. The decision came yesterday after another day at the site, when he realized that running away to work was no longer helping. Lurabelle must think that he knows nothing, that he is still the Xavier who believes her smiles and lies. He will be an ideal husband, caring, attentive, blind to her betrayal. Let him relax, let him let his guard down. It was a game, and he was going to win. Xavier washed his face with cold water, changed into a clean shirt, and went into town. On the way, he stopped at a flower shop on Congress Avenue Small, with a window filled with pots and bouquets. The saleswoman, an elderly woman with gray curls, smiled at him. "For someone special?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. "For my wife," he answered, making his voice sound warm. "Something bright. She loves flowers with character." "Then these are these," she said, pointing to a bouquet of orange lilies with red veins. "They shout about themselves." Xavier nodded, paid, and took the flowers. Their scent was sharp, almost bold, like Lurabelle in the days when he still loved her. He put the bouquet in the passenger seat and drove home for the first time in a week with the intention of staying. When he entered the house, Lurabelle was in the kitchen. She stood at the stove, stirring the Turkish coffee, her red hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. She was wearing a light robe, blue like her eyes, and she turned around when she heard the door creak. "Zav," she said, her eyebrows rising. "You're early." "I decided to take a break," he replied, picking up the bouquet. "This is for you." Her eyes widened, she froze with the Turk in her hands. "Flowers?" she asked, taking a step towards him. "Seriously?" "Why not?" He smiled, holding out the lilies. "I haven't bought it for a long time. I thought it was time to improve." Lurabelle took the bouquet, her fingers trembling slightly, a small thing that he noticed but did not show. She brought the flowers to her face, inhaled their scent, and looked at him in surprise. "Thank you, Zav," she said, her voice soft but wary. "I didn't expect it." "I just wanted to," he shrugged, taking off his shoes. "You love lilies." She nodded, placed the bouquet in a vase on the table, and returned to her coffee. Xavier walked into the kitchen, feeling the tension in the air. Lurabelle was confused. He saw it in her movements, in the way she fiddled with the hem of her robe. She had gotten used to his absence, to his cold detachment in recent days, and now he returned with flowers and a smile. It was a weapon, and he knew how to use it. "Will you stay at home today?" she asked, pouring coffee into 2 cups. "Yes," he nodded, sitting down at the table. "I want to rest. Maybe we can have dinner together." "Together?" She turned around, her gaze sharp. "Are you serious?" "What's wrong?" He grinned. "We haven't sat together for a long time." "I'll cook." Lurabelle fell silent, looking at him as if she was trying to figure out a trick. Then she smiled the same smile that once caught him at the fair. "Okay, Zav, if you want. What will you cook?" "Steak," he said. "With potatoes, your favorite." She nodded, placed the cup in front of him, and sat down opposite him. "You're different today," she remarked, taking a sip of coffee. "Did something happen?" "I'm just tired of running," he answered, looking into her eyes. "I decided it was time to be home." Her lips twitched into a faint smile, but he saw her relax. She believed or wanted to believe. Lurabelle thought that he had given up, that his absence was simply weariness, and now he had returned to her, weak and submissive. It was her mistake. That evening, Xavier stood at the grill in the backyard, flipping steaks. The smell of roasting meat mixed with smoke, and the setting sun painted the hills gold. Lurabelle came out to him, holding a glass of wine, her robe replaced by a light dress with a floral pattern like the one she was wearing the day they met. She looked beautiful, and for a moment Xavier felt a twinge of pain, a memory of what he had lost. But he pushed it away, concentrating on the game. "It smells delicious," she said, coming closer. "You're trying, right?" "Always for you," he answered, smiling over his shoulder. "How's work?" "Okay," she shrugged, taking a sip of wine. "A new client wants something in a loft style. Lots of iron and brick." "Sounds like my style," he joked, placing the steak on his plate. "Maybe I should retrain as a designer?" "I don't think so," she laughed. "You're better with a hammer than with a pencil." They sat down at the table on the veranda, where he had already laid out dinner steaks, fried potatoes with rosemary, a salad of fresh vegetables. Lurabelle ate with gusto, and Xavier watched her, noticing every little detail. She was relaxed, her shoulders slumped, her voice became softer. She accepted his efforts as weakness, a sign that he still belonged to her, that he did not see her lies. "You haven't cooked like this for a long time," she said, cutting off a piece of meat. "What came over you?" "I thought I was missing you," he replied, looking into her eyes. "We need to improve." She froze, the fork hanging in the air. Then she smiled, but a shadow flashed in her gaze, uncertainty, which she quickly hid. "That's nice, Zav," she said. "I'm glad you're home." He nodded, taking a sip of water. He skipped the wine to keep his head clear. They chatted about small things, about the weather, about the neighbor who had a noisy dog, about how she wanted to update the curtains in the living room. Lurabelle laughed as she recounted how a client demanded a golden toilet, and Xavier played along, feigning interest. But inside he was cold as steel. It was a game, and he played it masterfully. After dinner, they sat on the sofa in the living room. Lurabelle turned on an old movie, some Western with Clint Eastwood, and snuggled up to him, resting her head on his shoulder. Her hair smelled like jasmine, and Xavier clenched his jaw to keep from pushing her away. "You did great, Zav," she whispered, looking at the screen. "Today was great." "Glad you liked it," he replied, patting her on the back. His voice was warm, but his eyes remained empty. She fell asleep halfway through the movie, her breathing becoming even. Xavier looked at her, beautiful, deceitful, confident in her victory. She thought that he was broken, that flowers and dinner were his surrender. But he knew the truth. This was only the first act. He will continue to play until the time comes to drop the mask. Zav, did you forget to turn off the coffee again? Lurabelle's voice echoed through the kitchen as she stood at the stove, holding a Turk with the remains of a boiling drink. Xavier looked up from his phone, sitting at the table with a mug in his hands. The morning was quiet, sunlight streaming through the window, reflecting off her red hair. He smiled not sincerely, but with that precise smile that he had been honing in recent days. Sorry, Lyra. Thought about it. Do you want me to weld a new one? No, I can handle it myself, she chuckled, pouring the rest into the sink. You've been kind of absent-minded lately. What's wrong with you? He shrugged, taking a sip from his mug. A week has passed since he started playing the ideal husband flowers, dinners, evenings on the couch. Lurabelle relaxed, her wariness giving way to a slight mockery, as if she decided that he was simply tired of resisting. But Xavier did not relax. He weighed her every word, every glance, making a plan. Today he was going to take a new step to lure her into a trap from which she would not escape. Just thinking about us, he said, putting the mug down on the table. About you, about your work. About my work? She turned around, raising an eyebrow. This is something new. Since when do you care about my designs? Since I realized that you deserve more, he answered, looking into her eyes. You are talented, Lyra. Maybe it's time to open your own studio. Lurabelle froze, the spoon in her hand hovering over the coffee can. Studio? She asked again. Are you serious? Absolutely, he nodded, leaning back in his chair. Not just a corner in the office, but a real deal. Starling Designs sounds right. She put the Turk on the stove and walked up to the table, crossing her arms. Her blue eyes studied him, looking for a catch. Zav, that's nice, but do you know how much it costs? Rent, furniture, advertising. I can't handle it. What if I help? He said, smiling wider. I have something put aside. I can give you a start. Lurabelle blinked, her lips parting in surprise. Do you want to give me money? She asked, sitting down opposite. Seriously? Why not? He shrugged. You are my wife. I believe in you. She fell silent, looking at him as if he had just asked her to fly to the moon. Xavier could see the thoughts swirling around in her head: mistrust, greed, hope. He knew she would take the bait. Money was her weakness. He noticed it in her new dresses, expensive perfume, in the way she boasted about clients from wealthy areas. How much are you willing to give? She asked finally, lowering her voice. I think 50,000 is enough to get started, he said casually, as if it was a small thing. Rent, equipment, a couple of assistants. What do you say? 50,000. Her eyes widened. Zav, this is a lot. Are you sure? I'm sure, he nodded. The company is doing well. I can afford it. The main thing is that you are happy. Lurabelle stood up, walked over to him, and put her arms around his neck. Her hair brushed against his cheek, smelling of jasmine, and he clenched his jaw to keep from pulling away. You're incredible, Zav, she whispered, clinging to him. I don't even know what to say. Say yes, he chuckled, patting her on the back. And let's begin. Yes, she laughed, pulling away. Of course, yes. By noon, they were sitting in the living room, hunched over a laptop. Xavier opened the banking website, logged into his account, and showed her the balance: more than 100,000, accumulated over the years of work at R. Rain Builders. Lurabelle sat next to him, her knee touching him, and she chatted incessantly. We need to find a room in the center, she said, flipping through the rental advertisements. Something stylish, with large windows. Good idea, he nodded, feigning interest. What about the furniture? The tables are modern, the chairs are leather, she answered, her eyes sparkling. And the logo is Starling Designs in gold. What do you think? Sounds great, he said, smiling. Let's transfer the money so you can get started. She nodded and Xavier opened the transfer form. He entered her account, the one she used for work, and the amount. $50,000. Lurabelle watched him press send, and her smile widened. Done, he said, showing her confirmation. Now it's yours. Zav, you're a miracle, she said, kissing him on the cheek. "I'll start right tomorrow. I'll look for a place and hire a designer for the brand." "Take your time," he replied, closing the laptop. "Do everything wisely." She went into the bedroom, humming something, and Xavier remained sitting, looking at the screen. This was just the first step. The money went into her account, but he had already prepared a catch. Last night, he contacted a guy he knew through one of the contractors, a hacker named Jax, a thin guy with a nervous look. Xavier met him at a diner outside the city and gave him a task. "I need this 50,000 to look dirty," he said then, handing Jax an envelope with $1,000. "Link them to fake accounts." "Dirty?" Jax asked, scratching his stubbled chin. "Like laundering?" "Something like that," Xavier nodded. "Can you?" "Easy," Jax chuckled. "I'll give you accounts that lead to some shady offices. No one will know where they come from, but the stench will be strong." "Do it," Xavier said, and quickly. Now the money was in Lurabelle's account, but Jax was already working. Xavier knew that soon this 50,000 would become a time bomb, evidence that he could use when the time came. That evening, Lurabelle returned with a notebook full of ideas. She sat next to him on the sofa, her dress rustling as she flipped through the pages. "Look," she said, showing a sketch of the logo. "Golden bird, like my last name. Cool, right?" "Very," he nodded, feigning admiration. "You got the hang of it quickly." "Yeah," she smiled. "Tomorrow I'll go look at the premises. There's one on 6th Street with a storefront." "It must be expensive," he remarked, taking a sip of water. "Well, with your money I can afford it," she winked. "You won't regret it, Zav." "Good to hear," he said, placing his hand on her shoulder. "The main thing is that you like it." "I like it," she answered, clinging to him. "You really have changed. Became more attentive or something." "Maybe I just realized that I underestimated you," he said, looking into her eyes. She laughed, throwing her head back. "Well, better late than never. Thank you, Zav. This is my chance." They sat there for another hour, chatting about her plans. Lurabelle told me how she would hire an assistant, how she would order a sign, how she would work with rich clients. Xavier agreed, smiled, and poured her wine. She was delighted, her cheeks turned pink, and her voice became clear. She thought that he gave her a dream, that he was a weak, trusting husband, ready to shell out money for her whims. But he saw further. As she fell asleep, cuddled up against him, Xavier looked at the ceiling. Money was her weakness, and he had just given her a rope to hang herself with. Jax will connect this 50,000 with false accounts, murky, suspicious, such that they will raise questions from anyone who digs deeper. It was his move, and he knew she wouldn't notice the trick until it was too late. "Hey, Rain, are you going home, or are you going to spend the night here again?" Hank, an old carpenter with a gray beard, stood at the door of the trailer, looking at Xavier with a tired grin. Xavier looked up from the blueprints scattered on the table. Evening fell on the Lakeview construction site as the workers dispersed, leaving behind silence and the smell of freshly cut wood. He rubbed his temples, feeling the fatigue pressing on his shoulders. "I don't know, Hank," he answered, leaning back in his chair. "Maybe I'll go somewhere. I'll get divorced." "Well, look," Hank chuckled, adjusting his cap. "Otherwise, you're already like a ghost here. Take care, boss." He left, slamming the door, and Xavier was left alone. A week has passed since he transferred 50,000 to Lurabelle, linking it to fake accounts through the hacker Jax. She was euphoric, ran around the city, looking for space for a studio, and he played his role, smiled, assented, pretended to be an ideal husband. But today his thoughts were not about her. They revolved around Talula Graves, a rocker with a dark past whose name was now burned into his head. Zenobia gave him leverage old photos of traitors, and Xavier decided that it was time to meet the enemy face to face. He stood up, threw the plans into a drawer, and picked up the keys to the pickup truck. The black crowbar was located on the outskirts of Austin. Zenobia mentioned it in her reports. Xavier decided to go there by chance, as if he was just looking for a place to drink. But he had a plan: to get to know each other, to gain their trust, to lure Talula into a trap. He put on a clean shirt, ran his hand through his disheveled hair, and drove off. Black Crow looked like it had been ripped out of the 90s and dropped into modern-day Austin without renovation. A sign with a crooked font flashed neon, the windows were grimy with smoke, and the guitar riffs of some old rock ballad could be heard from inside. Xavier parked at the curb next to a couple of motorcycles and walked into the bar. It was dark inside, smelling of beer and sweat, and the light from the lamps with lampshades barely made it through the smoke. A few regulars were sitting at the bar, and a couple of bikers were playing pool in the corner. Xavier noticed him immediately. Talula Graves stood behind the bar, wiping his glass with a rag. Tall, thin, with long black hair pulled back into a ponytail, and an eyebrow piercing that glinted in the dim light. His face was sharp, with light stubble, and his eyes were dark, with an insolent squint. Xavier clenched his fists in his pockets, suppressing the urge to lunge at him right then and there. Instead, he walked up to the counter and sat down on a high chair. "What are you going to do?" Talulo said without looking up from his glass. His voice was low, with a slight hoarseness. "Beer," Xavier said, forcing himself to sound relaxed. "Lone Star, if available." "Yes," Talulo nodded, putting the glass on the shelf. He took a bottle from the refrigerator, opened it, and pushed it towards Xavier. $5. Xavier dropped the money on the counter and took a sip, watching him. Talula moved lazily, with the confidence of a man who considers himself master of the situation. Xavier had seen him on video in his bedroom, and now, looking at him in person, he felt the rage boiling under his skin. But he smiled coldly, calculatingly. "Not a bad place," he said, looking around the bar. "Yours?" "Yeah," Talulo replied, crossing his arms. "Black Raven. I've been holding it for 10 years now." "It's obvious that he has a soul," Xavier nodded. "I'm Xavier, by the way." Talula looked at him, narrowing his eyes. "Talula Graves," he said after a pause. "This is the first time I've seen you here." "I came in for the first time," Xavier shrugged. "Work nearby, I decided to have a drink after my shift." "Do you manage it yourself or with partners?" "Myself," Talulo replied, wiping the counter. "Partners are a headache." "What are you doing?" "Construction," said Xavier. "Homes, offices, everything." Talulo nodded, his gaze becoming a little more attentive. "You've done a good job, huh?" "We're trying," Xavier grinned, "and I see you keep the bar afloat. Have you thought about expanding?" Talulo froze, the rag in his hand stopping. "Expand?" He asked again. "I thought about it, but there is no money. This is not a construction site. Every dollar counts here." "I understand," Xavier nodded, taking a sip of his beer. "But the place is promising. The music is live, people are walking around. Maybe it's worth investing." Talulo looked at him with interest, his eyes sparkling. "What are you, an investor, or what?" he asked, grinning. "Not really," Xavier replied. "But sometimes I invest in interesting projects. You have an atmosphere here, you can feel your hand." Talulo put the rag down and leaned over the counter, leaning on his elbows. "Let's say," he said. "And what do you propose?" "Nothing concrete yet," Xavier shrugged. "I was just thinking out loud. How much would it take to, say, update the stage and install the lights?" 20 to 30,000, Talula answered, narrowing his eyes. "Are you seriously ready to invest?" Xavier saw how greed awoke in him, a slight sparkle in his eyes, slightly trembling fingers. He knew that the bar was drowning in debt, Zenobia told him. Talula was broke and money was like air to him. "Maybe I'm ready," Xavier said, smiling. "If we agree, you're not against partnership, are you?" "Against?" Talula chuckled. "Yes, I'm for it, if the money is real. What's in it for you?" "Interesting," Xavier replied. "I love it when things grow. Let's think, let's count." Talulo nodded, his face brightening. "Okay, you got me," he said. "Let's figure it out. The stage is 10,000, the light is another 5. Plus repairs and advertising, 30,000, and you can take the bar to a new level." "Sounds real," Xavier nodded. "Do you have a business plan?" "What a plan," Talulo laughed. "It's all in my head, but I know what I'm doing. If there was capital, it would have been developed long ago. I understand, Xavier said, finishing his beer. Let's do this. I'll think about it, estimate the numbers. Shall we meet again and discuss the details? No problem, Talulo replied, holding out his hand. Come in whenever. Xavier shook his hand, feeling Talula's cold skin brush against his fingers. He suppressed his disgust and smiled wider. Agreed, he said. See you. Talulo nodded and returned to his glasses as Xavier stood up and left the bar. The night air hit my face, cool and sharp, clearing my lungs of the smell of black raven. He got into the pickup, started the engine, and gripped the steering wheel. Talulo took the bait greed took its toll. He had no idea that Xavier knew who he was, that he was sleeping with his wife, that his past with illegal substances was in Xavier's pocket. It was a trap, and the first step had been taken. Are you sure this is a good idea, boss? Hank stood by Xavier's pickup, his arms crossed over his chest, his gray beard bristling from the wind blowing through the construction site. Xavier slammed the car door, glancing at the old carpenter. Friday night was falling on Lakeview, and the workers had already left, leaving behind silence and the smell of fresh paint. He smiled at Hank, a cold, forced smile that Hank hardly noticed in the darkness. I'm sure, Hank, he replied, shoving his hands into his jeans pockets. Just meeting a new partner. The deal must be noted. Well, look, Hank chuckled. You've been kind of different lately. Don't burn yourself out there. I won't burn out, Xavier said, clapping him on the shoulder. Go home, rest. Hank nodded and walked away, and Xavier got into the pickup. It had been a week since he had accidentally met Talula Graves at the Black Crow and lured him in with an offer of investment. Talulo, greedy for money, took the bait immediately, and they agreed to meet again to discuss the details. But Xavier wasn't going to invest a dime. He had a different plan. Today, he invited Talula to a party ostensibly to meet potential partners, but in reality to destroy him. He took out his phone and dialed a number. Graves, Talulo answered after the second ring, his voice as hoarse as ever. This is Rain, Xavier said. Are you in for the evening? Yeah, Talulo chuckled. Where and when? The warehouse is on the outskirts, off the old road to Route 71, he answered. At 9. There will be a couple of guys, a couple of bottles. Let's celebrate our partnership. Sounds tempting, Talulo said. I will come. Xavier hung up the call, gripped the steering wheel, and started the engine. The warehouse was an abandoned place that he had found a couple of days ago. Rusty walls, empty boxes, the perfect place for what he had in mind. He has already prepared everything. By 9 o'clock in the evening, the warehouse had turned into something of a party. Xavier brought an old table, a couple of chairs, a case of beer, and a bottle of whiskey. A cheap Bluetooth speaker played rock music, something from Guns N' Roses, to make Talula feel at ease. The two guys he hired through a bartender he knew were already there, strong, silent, empty-eyed. They knew what to do. In the corner, behind the boxes, two girls were waiting women for the night, whom Xavier had found through the same intermediary. Both are young, with bright makeup and short skirts, ready to play their role for a couple of hundred. Talulo arrived on an old motorcycle, his long black hair flowing as he took off his helmet. He walked into the warehouse, looking around with a slight smirk. Well, there you go, Rain, he said, nodding at the table with drinks. Is this your party style? Simplicity is the key to success, Xavier replied, handing him a beer. The main thing is that the company is good. Talulov took the bottle, took a sip, and clapped Xavier on the shoulder. I like your approach, he said. Who are these guys? Acquaintances, Xavier nodded at the mercenaries. Joe and Mike. They are interested in your bar. Hey, muttered Joe, a big guy with a tattoo on his neck, holding up the bottle. Mike simply nodded. Talula sat down at the table, relaxing. So, Rain, he began, taking a sip of his beer. How much are you willing to invest? 30,000, as they said. Maybe more, Xavier replied, sitting down opposite him. Depends on how we agree. Tell me what you want to do with the Raven. Talulo perked up, his eyes sparkling. New stage, lights, a couple of concerts a month, he said, gesticulating. I'll bring some old buddies from Houston and we'll set up a party. If there is money, I will bring this bar to the top. Sounds solid, Xavier nodded, pouring whiskey into his glass. What about debts? You said there were problems there. Nonsense, Talulo waved him off. I'll close them with the first profit. The main thing is the start. Xavier smiled, moving his glass closer. The whiskey was special. He added powder to it in advance, which he got through Jack's. Nothing lethal, just a strong stimulant mixed with something relaxing. Enough for Talulo to lose control, but not pass out. Here we go, Xavier said, raising his beer. Shall we have a drink? Here's to the start, Talulo grinned, knocking over his glass. They chatted for another half-hour. Talulo about his plans. Xavier assented, pouring him more. Joe and Mike were silent, sipping beer. Their role had not yet begun. After some time, Talulo began to blink more often. His movements became sharp, and his voice became louder. Damn, Rain, you know how to lighten the mood, he said, slamming his hand on the table. The music needs to be louder. It will be now, Xavier nodded, motioning to the girls. They came out from behind the boxes, swaying their hips. One is a blonde in a red top, the other is a brunette in a leather skirt. Talulo turned, his eyes widening. What is this, a bonus? He chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Consider it yes, Xavier replied, smiling. Relax, Graves. The girls approached him. The blonde sat on his lap. The brunette began to dance next to him. Talulo laughed, his hands reaching out to the blonde. Come on, Rain, he said, his voice trembling with excitement. This is what I understand, partnership. Glad you like it, Xavier replied, taking out his phone. He turned on the camera, discreetly pointing it at Talulo. The prohibited substances were already taking effect. His movements were chaotic. His eyes sparkled. He pulled the blonde towards him, whispering something in her ear. The brunette played along, pulling off her top. Joe and Mike stood up as if to leave, but remained in the shadows, watching. Xavier filmed every movement, every sound. Talulo, drunk on whiskey and illegal substances, was oblivious to his surroundings. Come on, baby, he muttered, kissing the blonde's neck. Show me what you can do. Whatever you say, she giggled, unbuttoning his shirt. Xavier filmed for another 10 minutes until the scene became frankly compromising. Talulo, half naked, with two girls for money, in smoke and lantern light. Then he turned off the recording, put the phone in his pocket, and nodded to Joe. Take them away, he said quietly. Joe and Mike came over and pulled the girls away from Talulo. He tried to stand up, but his legs gave way and he collapsed back into his chair. Hey, what the... he muttered, blinking. Rain, where are you? Here, Xavier replied, coming closer. Rest, Graves. See you. He walked out of the warehouse, leaving Talulo in a semi-conscious state. Joe and Mike left with the girls through the back door, as agreed. Xavier got into his pickup truck, connected his phone to his laptop, and uploaded the video via an anonymous account to a local Austin forum, a place where rumors spread like the wind. The rocker from Black Crow is relaxing, he wrote in the description and hit publish. He started the engine and drove away, leaving the warehouse behind. The video has already started making its way online, and by morning Talulo will wake up with a ruined reputation. This was the night of his fall, and Xavier knew this was just the beginning. You didn't spend the night at home again, Xav. Lurabelle stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, her voice cutting through the morning silence like a knife. Xavier froze with a mug of coffee in his hand, looking at her across the table. He had just walked into the house after a night spent in a pickup truck at a construction site the night after a warehouse party where he had framed Talulo Graves. His shirt was wrinkled and his eyes were red from fatigue, but he forced himself to smile. Hello, Lyra, he said, putting the mug on the table. Yes, I was delayed. Job. Work, she repeated, narrowing her blue eyes. You're always talking about work, and I'm sitting here alone like a fool. He shrugged, hiding his tension. It's been a week since he wired her 50,000 for the studio, and 3 days since he accidentally met Tallulah at Black Raven. Yesterday's party was his move. A video of Tallulah, drunk and surrounded by women of easy virtue, was already circulating on the internet, but Lurable did not know about it. Xavier played his part, but today something in her tone made him wary. "Sorry," he said, sitting down at the table. "I'll finish the project soon. It will be easier. Would you like me to make you some coffee?" "I don't need your coffee," she snapped, taking a step towards him. "I want to know where you were yesterday. Is it true?" Xavier looked at her, feeling a chill run down his spine. Her voice trembled, but not from fatigue, from anger. Her red hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her robe had fallen open to reveal a thin nightgown, but there was no softness in her eyes. "I told you," he began, trying to sound calm, "at a construction site. There was a meeting with contractors." "Meeting?" she interrupted, her tone becoming harsher. "Until the morning? Do you think I'm completely stupid, Xavier?" He frowned, pushing his mug away. "What are you talking about, Lyra? Be direct." "About Kate calling me yesterday," she said, putting her hands on her hips. "My friend, she says she saw you in some abandoned place with two girls of easy virtue." Xavier froze. "Kate is her friend, a chatty brunette he's met a couple of times at parties. She couldn't be in the warehouse. He carefully chose a place where there were no prying eyes." But Lurabelle looked at him with such confidence that he knew that someone had seen something, or that she had made it up to test him. "Girls of easy virtue?" he asked, raising his eyebrows. "Kate's been drinking too much, hasn't she?" "Don't lie to me," she shouted, slamming her palm on the table. "She said she saw your pickup truck at some warehouse. And you and some girls. Are you cheating on me, Zav?" He clenched his jaw, suppressing a flash of anger. It was funny, after sleeping with Tallulah for over a year, she accuses him of cheating. But he showed no emotion, just leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Lyra, are you serious?" he said, making his voice sound tired. "I worked all night. No one saw me with women of easy virtue because they were not there. Kate is on to something. Did you make a mistake?" She stepped closer, her face turning purple. "She knows your pickup, Xavier. And she's not lying. You're messing with my brains." Xavier stood up, looking into her eyes. He could tell the truth that he was in the warehouse, but not with girls of easy virtue, but with her lover, whom he set up. But that would ruin his plan, and he swallowed his words. "If you don't believe me, ask Hank," he said. "He saw me at the construction site yesterday. I was there until late, then I went to check the materials. No girls, Lyra." She fell silent, her eyes darting over his face, searching for a crack in his mask. Then she snorted, turning away. "Hank is your friend, he'll say anything," she said. "I don't believe you, Zav. You have a guilty face." "You're paranoid," he replied with a shrug. "I'm almost never at home because I work, and you invent cheating." Lurabelle turned around sharply, her eyes flashing. "Don't you dare talk to me about paranoia," she shouted. "I know what Kate saw, and guess what? I'm tired of this. From your excuses, from your cold face, I'm filing for divorce." Xavier froze, his heart skipping a beat. "Divorce." She said it so easily, as if she had rehearsed it. He looked at her, and Zenovia's words were spinning in his head. She's preparing a divorce. She wants half of the company. This was her plan, and now she has found a reason. "Divorce?" he asked, lowering his voice. "Because Kate saw something there." "Not only that," she snapped. "You're not the same for a long time, Zav. You are cold, distant, and now this. I'm not going to live with a husband who goes to different places." "Lyra, you're screwing yourself over," he said, taking a step towards her. "Let's talk calmly." "No," she snapped, retreating. "I have already decided everything. I have a lawyer. I'll take what's owed to me and leave." Xavier clenched his fists in his pockets, but his face remained calm. She was confident, too confident. He saw it in her posture, in the way she stood up straight, in her burning eyes. She thought she had him, that Kate's story would give her an edge in court. "Are you sure you want this?" he asked, looking into her eyes. Absolutely, she replied, crossing her arms. I'm tired, Zav. I don't need you anymore. Okay, he nodded, retreating. Do as you please. I'll do it, she said, turning to the stove. You can leave. I don't want to see you here. Xavier took the keys from the table and left without saying another word. The door slammed behind him, and he got into the pickup, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Xavier Rain looked at his reflection in the murky mirror of a diner on the outskirts of Austin, a tired face, with dark circles under his eyes, stubble breaking out in uneven patches. He sat in the corner at a table with a cracked top, inhaling the smell of rancid oil and cheap beer. This place, broken steering wheel, was far from his usual life. No gloss, no familiar faces, only truckers and random travelers. He didn't choose it by chance. After Lurabelle accused him of cheating and filed for divorce, he realized it was time to end the game. Today, he met with a person who will help him put an end to it. A week has passed since that quarrel in the kitchen when she threw words about girls for the night and a lawyer in his face. Since then, he has hardly been home, sleeping in a trailer or pickup truck, avoiding her calls. The Talula video has already gone viral, but Lurabelle doesn't seem to have connected him to Xavier, yet she's been too busy with her divorce and the studio. The $50,000 he'd transferred to her was in her account, linked to shell companies thanks to Jax, but it wasn't enough. He needed the final blow evidence that would turn her money into evidence that could not be avoided. He took a sip of warm coffee from a cracked mug when the door to the diner creaked open and a skinny guy in a hoodie walked in. Jax is the same hacker who helped with the first stage. Xavier saw him a couple of times, nervous, with sunken cheeks and eyes darting like a rat's. Jax looked around the room, noticed Xavier, and walked over, throwing his backpack on a chair. Rain, he muttered, sitting down opposite. What did you call? It's a matter, Xavier said, lowering his voice. We need to finish what we started. Finish? Jax squinted, pulling out a pack of cigarettes. Are you talking about those 50 grand for your wife? Yeah, Xavier nodded, pushing his mug away. They are on her account. You connected them with shady companies. But I need more. Jax lit a cigarette, blowing smoke into the ceiling. How's that for more? He asked, tapping his fingers on the table. I already made them dirty. You can track it if you dig. I need them to be impossible to wash, Xavier said, looking into his eyes. Link them to illegal sex relationships and money laundering. Clearly, with evidence. I want anyone who looks to see crime. Jax whistled, taking a drag from his cigarette. You're playing seriously, Rain, he said. It's not just dirt, it's a bomb. Why do you need it? None of your business, Xavier snapped. Can you or not? Jax fell silent, looking at him through the smoke. Then he nodded. I can, he said, but it's not cheap and risky. How many? Xavier asked, taking out his wallet. 2 pieces, Jax answered, putting out his cigarette on the edge of the table. Half now, half later. Here's 1,000, Xavier said, slipping him an envelope under the table. The rest when you're done. How will you work? Jax took the envelope, looked inside, and stuffed it into his backpack. Simple, he said, grinning. I have access to her account. You gave me the data when you made the transfer. I've already linked them to a couple of shell companies, but that's a small matter. Now let's create a chain. What chain? Xavier asked, leaning closer. Look, Jax began, lowering his voice. I'll add transactions. Small but frequent. From her account to accounts that lead to places where they offer sexual services. There are a couple of them in Mexico that have long been under the radar. Then I will show the reverse flow as if she took cash from there, plus a couple of fake letters from clients. Everything will look like laundering through illegal sexual relations. Xavier nodded, his fingers clenching into fists. What if they dig deeper? He asked. It won't be revealed that it's a fake. It won't open, Jax chuckled. I'll confuse my tracks. Accounts through offshore companies, servers on the darknet. Even if the FBI gets involved, it will take years to sort it out. And your Lurabelle is enough for a local cop to float. Okay, Xavier said. How much time? 2 or 3 days, Jax replied, rubbing his hands. Everything needs to be carefully prepared. Do you want to go straight to the police? No, Xavier shook his head. If you do it, you'll give it to me. I'll decide when to use it. Whatever you say, Jax shrugged. Anything else? Xavier hesitated, looking at him. Jax was as slippery as an eel, but he knew his stuff. Not yet, he said. Just do it cleanly. Clean is my thing, Jax grinned, standing up. I'll call you when it's ready. He left, leaving behind the smell of smoke and an empty chair. Xavier finished his coffee, feeling the plan come to fruition. Lurabelle's money, which she so greedily accepted, will become her noose. He imagined her face surprised, confused when the truth came out. She filed for divorce, thinking she had won, but he was one step ahead. Later that evening, Xavier sat in a pickup truck at a construction site, looking at the stars above the hills. The phone lay on the passenger seat, the screen glowing from a missed call from Lurabelle. She called an hour ago, but he didn't answer. He didn't want to hear her voice, her lies. He remembered their last fight. I'll take what's owed to me. She wanted his company, his money, his life. But now he will take everything from her. He dialed Zenobia. He needed her hoarse voice to check one more detail. Crow, she answered after the third ring. This is Rhine, he said. How are things with Talulo? The video is circulating, she chuckled. His bar is emptying. People are whispering. You did him well. What else do you need? Nothing yet, he replied. Just keep your eyes open. As always, she said and hung it up. Xavier put the phone away and started the engine. The plan was nearing completion. Jax will make Lurabelle's accounts irrefutable, and when she goes to court for his company, he will lay out his cards. She won't just lose, she'll collapse. He pictured her in court with a lawyer, confident that he was right, and smiled sincerely for the first time in weeks. Rain pattered on the roof of Xavier's pickup, drowning out the roar of the engine as he drove through the wet streets of Austin. The windshield wipers slid lazily across the windshield, smearing the droplets, and the cabin smelled of dampness and coffee from the paper cup he was holding in his hand. It's been a week since he hired Jax to finally link Lurabelle's accounts to sexual favors and money laundering. The hacker finished the job 2 days ago, giving him a flash drive with evidence transactions, fake letters, a chain of accounts leading to Mexican places where they provide sexual services. Xavier anonymously sent this to the police through Zenovia's contact and now waited for the trap to close. He parked at a construction site in Lakeview, but didn't get out, just sat there looking at the blurry lights in the distance. Lurabelle filed for divorce, accusing him of cheating, and was confident that she would win, taking half of our Rain Builders. She didn't know that he had already turned the board over. This morning Zenobia called, hoarsely reporting, the cops took her. They searched the house. Everything was going on. Xavier did not answer then, only nodded into the void. His plan worked. The phone vibrated on the seat. He took it Lurabelle. His finger hovered over the button, but he answered anyway. Zav. Her voice was high, trembling, almost a scream. They took me. Police. What? He said, feigning surprise. What are you talking about? I was arrested, she shouted. They say something about money, sex, and laundering. This is crazy. Xavier clenched his jaw so as not to give himself away. Lyra, calm down, he said, forcing his voice to sound even. What are they saying? They broke this morning. Her breathing was ragged. They searched the house, took my laptop and phone. They say they have evidence that I am involved in some kind of illegal sexual relations. Zav, this is a lie. Sexual relations? He asked again, adding a note of disbelief. Seriously? Where is this from? I don't know, she shouted. This is nonsense. They showed some transfers from my account, but I didn't do anything like that. You must help me. Xavier looked at the rain running down the glass. Help her. She wanted to destroy him, and now she's asking for help. Lyra, I don't know what's going on, he said, but if it's a mistake, they'll sort it out. Do you have a lawyer? Yes, but he says that the evidence is serious. Her voice broke. Zav, they are taking me to the station. What should I do? Sit quietly, he replied. Don't say anything without a lawyer. I'll see what I can do. Please, Zav, she sobbed. I don't understand what's going on. He hung up the call without waiting for an answer. Her panic was real, and it gave him grim satisfaction. He started the engine and drove into town, not home, but to the newsstand on 6th Street. There, under the awning, he bought the morning edition of the Austin Tribune. The headline on the front page read, Interior designer arrested on suspicion of money laundering and links to illegal activities. Below is a photo of Lurabelle taken at an event a couple of years ago, and the lines, Lurabelle Starling, a famous designer, was detained this morning on charges of financial crimes. Police report evidence linking her to underground premises in Mexico. Xavier folded the newspaper and tucked it under his jacket. Her name in the headlines, her reputation in the mud, it was his move, and it hit the mark. He got into the pickup truck and drove away, feeling the tension release from his shoulders. Lurabelle sat on the dock, her hands shaking, clasped in her lap, and her blue eyes looking at the floor. The courtroom was small, with wood paneling and the smell of old paper, but to her it must have felt like a cage. Xavier stood against the back wall, arms crossed, watching her from the shadows. A month has passed since her arrest, and today the court handed down the verdict. He hadn't spoken to her since that call in the rain, only glimpsed her as she walked out on bail, pale and lost. Now she was here, and he was waiting for the finale. The judge, an elderly man with a gray mustache, leafed through the papers, his voice booming like distant thunder. Mrs. Starling, you are accused of money laundering and engaging in illegal activities related to sexual services. Considering the evidence presented, bank transactions, emails, witness statements, the court came to the conclusion that you are guilty. Lurabelle raised her head, her lips trembling. This is not true, she shouted, standing up. I didn't do anything. This is a setup. Her lawyer, a balding man in a cheap suit, tugged at her sleeve. Sit down, Mrs. Starling, he hissed. Don't make it worse. The judge rapped his gavel, his gaze stern. Mrs. Starling, your objections have been taken into account, but the evidence speaks for itself, he said. However, given your lack of criminal record and mitigating circumstances, the court sentences you to 3 years probation with a probationary period and a fine of $20,000. Lurabelle collapsed on the bench, her face white. Probation isn't jail time, but it's enough to ruin her life. Xavier saw her clutch her head in her hands and her shoulders shake. The lawyer whispered something to her, but she did not listen. The hall began to disperse. Reporters ran to the exit to have time to print the news. Xavier stepped towards her as she stood up, supported by the lawyer. Her eyes met his full of tears, rage and despair. Zav, she croaked, her voice weak. Did you know? What are you talking about, Lyra? He answered, pretending not to understand. I told you they'll sort it out. Don't lie, she shouted, stepping towards him. It's you. You did it. The lawyer grabbed her arm, pulling her back. Mrs. Starling, calm down, he said. Not in court. I know it's you, she hissed, breaking free. You set me up. For what? Xavier looked at her without blinking. Her reputation collapsed, newspapers savored the story, clients turned away, the studio she dreamed of remained an empty sign. But he wasn't finished. It was only a trial, only a suspended sentence. She didn't yet know what he had in store next. Lyra, you need to rest, he said, lowering his voice. You brought yourself down. Bastard, she spat, her eyes flashing. I'll find evidence. You will pay. She turned and walked away, supported by the lawyer, her steps unsteady. Xavier looked after her, feeling cold satisfaction. She was desperate, but he wasn't going to stop. His plan was more than a trial, more than newspapers. He left the hall, the rain had already stopped, and the air smelled of dampness and freedom. Xavier Rain stood at the window of a trailer at a construction site, looking out at the lights of Austin twinkling in the distance like stars that had fallen to the ground. He clutched a bottle of water in his hands, the plastic cracked under his fingers, but he did not notice it. His thoughts were occupied with Label. A month had passed since the court gave her a suspended sentence, and her life had fallen apart. Newspapers carried her name all over the city, clients turned away, and Starling Designs remained an empty sign above a rented space that she could no longer pay for. She called him a couple of times, screamed into the phone, accused him, but he just listened without answering. Her despair was his victory, but not his final one. He wanted her to disappear completely, without a trace. He put the bottle on the table and sat down, rubbing his temples. The trial was only part of the plan. The trumped-up charges of money laundering from illegal affairs had ruined her reputation, but she was still here in Austin, clinging to what was left of her life. Xavier knew that probation would keep her from going far, but he found a way. Through Zenobia, he reached people's shadow intermediaries who could arrange everything quietly and cleanly. Today, he took the last step. The phone was in front of him, and he dialed a number not Lurabelle, but a man named Raul, a Mexican with a voice like the rustle of gravel. Xavier found him through one of Zenovia's contacts, paying $1,000 for his services. Raul answered the voice after the second ring. "This is Rain," Xavier said, lowering his voice. "Is everything ready?" "Yes, Hombre," Raul chuckled. "My people are in place. When will she go?" "Soon," he replied. "You know what to do." "I know," said Raul. "Work in Mexico City, design contract, everything as you said. She won't suspect it. And then our concern." "How many?" Xavier asked. "5 pieces," answered Raul. "Half now, half later." "It will be," Xavier nodded. "The main thing is to be quiet." Raul chuckled and hung up. Xavier put his phone in his pocket and exhaled. The plan was simple. Lure Lurabelle to Mexico under the guise of a job, a project that would lift her out of debt and despair. Raul promised that his people would organize a sale to a place where girls provide their sexual services for money somewhere in the interior of the country where no one would find her. This was the point of no return, and Xavier did not hesitate. The next day he called Lurabelle. She did not answer immediately. Her voice was tired, broken. "What do you want, Zav?" she asked, not hiding her irritation. "Hello, Lyra," he said, forcing himself to sound soft. "How are you?" "How are you?" she snorted. "Are you kidding me? I'm up to my ears in shit, and you ask me how I'm doing." "I heard that everything is bad," he said. "That's why I'm calling. There is an opportunity to help you." "Help?" Her tone became sharper. "You've already helped me, Xavier. What now?" He paused, as if searching for words. "I have contact," he began. "One guy from Mexico City, looking for a designer for a big project, a villa for some rich man. They are willing to pay well." "Mexico City?" she asked, wariness flashing in her voice. "Why should I believe you?" "Don't trust me," he shrugged, although she didn't see it. "Call yourself. Here's the number. His name is Miguel." He dictated a fake number that Raul had given. Lurabelle fell silent, and he heard her breathing into the phone. "How much do they pay?" she asked finally. 100,000, he said, "for 3 months of work. I think it won't bother you now." 100,000, she repeated, her voice trembling. "And you just give it to me." "I don't," he replied. "I'm just passing on the contact. Decide for yourself." She fell silent again, and Xavier knew she would take the bait. Money was her weakness, and now that she was left with nothing, it was her only chance. "Okay," she said finally, "I will think. But if this is a hoax, Zav—" "This is not deception," he interrupted. "Call Miguel. Good luck, Lyra." He hung up the call and leaned back in his chair. She will call. She will go. And she won't come back. 3 days later, Lurabelle stood outside her sedan, throwing her bag into the trunk. Xavier watched her from afar, parking his pickup truck a block from their house. She looked exhausted, pale, with dark circles under her eyes, her hair casually tied up. The trial broke her, but not completely. There was still a spark of stubbornness in her movements. She got into the car and drove away without looking back. Xavier knew that she was heading south to the border, where Miguel would meet her with the contract. Raul called in the evening when Xavier was sitting in the trailer with a bottle of beer. "She crossed the border," he said. "My people are with her. Tomorrow we'll be in Mexico City." What's next? Xavier asked, taking a sip of his beer. He'll sign the papers and go to the object, Raoul chuckled. And there, you know. Quiet, Xavier clarified. Like a whisper, answered Raoul. She will be taken into the depths. Nobody will find it. Okay, Xavier said. The rest of the money is tomorrow. I'm waiting, Homber, said Raoul and hung up. Xavier put the phone on the table and closed his eyes. Lurabelle will disappear. She will be sold to a place somewhere in the Mexican wilderness, a place where there are no laws, only shadows. He felt no pity she had betrayed him, wanted to take his life, and now she was paying the price. A week later, Zenobia called. Her voice was hoarse, as usual. Rain, your wife is missing, she said. Are you aware? I heard, he answered, feigning indifference. She went somewhere for work. Don't know. We're getting a divorce. She doesn't let me know about her affairs. She left, right? Zenobia chuckled. Okay, none of my business. If anything, call. He hung up the call and left the trailer. The night was clear. The stars hung over the hills like shards of glass. Xavier Rain sat behind the wheel of a pickup truck parked on the side of the old Highway 71 road, listening to the wind rustle, the dry grass outside the window. The night was dark, moonless, only the headlights snatched out of the darkness pieces of asphalt, cracked with time. In his hands he twirled a lighter, an old one, with an eagle engraved on it, a gift from his father, who had been dead for a long time. The click of metal calmed me and helped me concentrate. Xavier threw his lighter on the seat and rubbed his face with his hands. The video from the party, where Talulo, drunk and surrounded by girls of easy virtue, lost his reputation, did its job. Black Crow was empty, debts piled up, and old rocker friends turned their backs. But this was not enough. Xavier wanted to end everything in person, face to face. He took out his phone and dialed Talulo's number, which he had given him at the bar when he still believed in investing. Rain? Talulo's voice was hoarse, tired, with a hint of irritation. What do you want at night? We need to meet, Xavier said, forcing himself to sound calm. Settle things. What's going on? Talulov muttered. You don't owe me anything. I must, he replied. There is a conversation. Come to the warehouse off Highway 71. In 1 hour. Talula fell silent, and Xavier could hear him breathing into the phone. Is this the one where we drank? He asked finally. Yes, Xavier nodded. Come alone. Okay, Talulo said after a pause. But if this is some bullshit, Rain, I'm not in the mood. Just a conversation, Xavier replied and hung up the call. He started the engine and drove to the warehouse, the same one where Talula had lost everything a month ago. The abandoned place looked even gloomier. Rusty walls, broken windows, heaps of rubbish in the corners. Xavier parked at the entrance, got out and looked around. 2 mercenaries, Joe and Mike, were already waiting inside, the same guys from the party, silent and ready to carry out orders for a couple of hundred. He nodded to them through the doorway. Wait in the shadows, he said quietly. When I tell you, come out. Whatever you say, Joe muttered, crossing his arms. Mike simply nodded. Xavier walked back to the pickup, leaned against the hood, and waited. His plan was simple. Lure Talula here, make him feel safe, and then strike not with words, but with his fists. He wanted Talula to pay for everything for Lurabelle, for their bedroom, for every day that Xavier lived in hell. An hour later, the headlights of a motorcycle cut through the darkness. Talulo pulled up, turned off the engine, and got off, throwing his helmet on the seat. His long black hair was disheveled, and the piercing in his eyebrow gleamed dimly in the light of the lantern that Xavier turned on at the entrance. He looked worse than in the bar, thin, with sunken cheeks, wearing an old leather jacket that smelled of tobacco. Well, Rain, he said, coming closer. What is the urgency? Xavier stood up straight, crossing his arms. Hi, Graves, he nodded. Shall we go inside? We'll talk there. Why not talk on the street? Talulo muttered, but still followed him. They entered the warehouse, footsteps echoing off the walls. Xavier stopped at the old table, where there were still empty bottles from that night. Talula looked around, his gaze wary. So what's up? He asked, placing his hands on his hips. Did you bring me some money or something? Not really, Xavier replied, sitting down on the edge of the table. I want to clarify something. Should I clarify? Talula narrowed his eyes. Are you talking about that party, or what? After that, everything went to hell. Xavier smiled coldly, almost predatory. What did you think would happen? He said, I drank, had fun, and then the video went online. It turned out tough. Do you know about the video? Talulu stepped towards him, his voice sharper. Where? Everyone knows, Xavier shrugged. Austin is a small city. Rumors spread quickly. Talula clenched his fists, his face darkening. You set me up, or what? He asked, lowering his voice. Did you arrange this? What if I do too? Xavier replied, looking into his eyes. What will you do? Talula froze, his breathing heavy. You're a bitch, Rain, he spat. For what? I didn't do anything to you. Nothing? Xavier stood up, stepping towards him. And Lurabelle, my wife? Is this also nothing? Talula turned pale and his eyes widened. Your wife? I didn't know that she was your wife. Did you? No, he muttered. Where? I saw you, Xavier said, his voice low as a growl. In my bedroom. Did you think I was blind? Talula stepped back, his hands shaking. Listen, Rain, it's not what you think, he began. She herself. Shut up, Xavier snapped, clenching his fists. You slept with my wife for over a year. Helped her ruin me. Now you will pay. Talula took another step back, looking around like a hunted animal. You're sick, he said, his voice trembling. I didn't want problems. Where is she anyway? Not your concern, Xavier replied. She left, and you are next. He nodded into the shadows, and Joe and Mike stepped forward, their footsteps echoing in the empty warehouse. Talula turned around, his face contorted with fear. What the hell is this, Rain? He shouted, retreating to the wall. What are you planning? Settle things, Xavier said, coming closer. Did you think I would forgive? Talula tried to rush towards the exit, but Joe grabbed his arm, yanking him back. Mike stood by the door with his arms crossed. Xavier looked at Talula, feeling the rage that had been building for months come to the surface. You're a goner, Graves, he said, clenching his fists. This is your last night. Talula fell to his knees, his eyes darting between Xavier and the mercenaries. Rain, don't, he croaked. I will leave, disappear, please. It's too late, Xavier replied, leaning towards him. You took my life. Now I'll take yours. Xavier Rain looked at Talula Graves kneeling in the dark of an abandoned warehouse and felt his pulse pounding in his temples. Cold air rushed into the lungs, mixing with the smell of rust and old wood, and the silence was broken only by Talula's heavy breathing. His long black hair stuck to his face, the piercing in his eyebrow gleamed in the light of the lantern, but his eyes dark, full of fear, betrayed a man who realized that there was no way out. Joe and Mike, the mercenaries, stood to either side, their shadows falling on the concrete floor like silent sentinels. Xavier clenched his fists, feeling the skin stretch across his knuckles. This was the end payback for everything Talula had taken from him. Talula raised his head, his voice shaking as he spoke. Rain, listen. I didn't mean to. It's her, Lurabelle, herself. Shut up, Xavier cut him off, stepping closer. You slept with my wife, in my house, on my bed. Talula sucked in a breath, his hands shaking as they pressed against the floor. I didn't know that you. He began, but Xavier hit him sharply, with his fist in the jaw. Talula's head jerked to the side and blood began to flow from her mouth, dripping onto the concrete. He collapsed on his side, coughing, but Xavier grabbed him by the collar of his leather jacket and yanked him back to his knees. You knew, he growled, looking into his eyes. You helped her ruin me. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Talula coughed, spitting out blood. I didn't think. He croaked. It was her idea, the divorce, the money. I just. Xavier hit again, this time on the cheekbone. The crunch of bone echoed in the emptiness of the warehouse. You just ruined my life. Talula fell, his hands sliding along the floor, trying to crawl away. Joe stepped forward, grabbed him by the hair, and yanked him up, holding him so he wouldn't collapse again. Mike stood silently, arms crossed, his face stony. Xavier wiped the blood from his fist on his jeans and leaned towards Talula, whose breathing had become ragged. "Did you think the video was everything?" he said, his voice low as the whisper of death. "No, Graves. This is just the beginning." Talula blinked, his eyes clouded with pain and fear. "What do you want?" he croaked. "Kill me." "No," Xavier replied, straightening up. "Death is too easy. You will live, but not like before." He nodded to Joe, who let go of Talula's hair, pushing him forward. Talula fell to his knees, coughing up blood, his body trembling. Xavier motioned to Mike, who stepped closer, clenching his fists. "Hold him," Xavier said to Joe. Joe grabbed Talula's arms, twisting them backwards until he screamed. Mike stood in front of him, his shadow covering Talula like a shroud. Xavier looked at the man who was a rocker, his wife's lover, an insolent bastard, confident in his impunity. Now he was nothing. "Please, Rain," Talula croaked, his voice breaking. "I'll leave. I'll disappear. Don't." "You've already disappeared," Xavier replied, his voice as cold as steel. "But I'll take more from you." He nodded to Mike, who kicked him hard in the stomach. Talula bent over, gasping for breath, but Joe held him tight. Xavier stepped closer, looking into his eyes, full of horror. "You loved women, right?" he said, bending down. "Lurabelle, those girls at the party, it's in the past now." He stepped back, motioning to Mike. He struck again, below the belt, with such force that Talula screamed, his voice echoing throughout the warehouse. Xavier clenched his jaw as he watched Mike throw another punch, aiming precisely to destroy anything that might give Talula a future. Talula collapsed as Joe let go, curling up in a ball on the floor, his cries turning into hoarse moans. Xavier looked at him, feeling the rage slowly subside, giving way to a dark emptiness. "That's enough," he said, raising his hand. Mike stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. Joe crossed his arms, looking at Talula, who was writhing on the floor, holding his groin. Xavier came closer, leaned down and grabbed his chin, forcing him to look at him. "You're alive, Graves," he said, his voice quiet but heavy. "But you're not a man anymore. Remember this every day." Talula groaned, his head falling as Xavier let go of him. He stood up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and turned to Joe and Mike. "We're leaving," he said. "Leave him here." Joe nodded, and Mike followed silently. Xavier walked out of the warehouse without looking back. The sound of the mercenaries' footsteps faded behind them, and Talula's moans became quieter. He got into the pickup truck, started the engine, and turned on the headlights, illuminating the empty road. Talula was left lying on the cold concrete, alive but broken, stripped of everything that made him who he was. Xavier knew that the doctors could not fix anything. The blows were precise and destructive. This was his revenge, and it was complete. Xavier Rain stood in the middle of his Austin office, looking at the empty walls where blueprints and photographs of completed projects had recently hung. The room was bare, the table had been taken out, the cabinets were empty, only the smell of fresh paint reminded me that life had once been in full swing here. Our Rain Builders no longer existed. He had sold the company 3 days earlier, signing papers with the buyer, a young Dallas businessman who wanted to expand his business. $70,000 fell into his account, and Xavier felt neither regret nor sadness. This was the last piece of his old life that he let go of. He ran his hand along the door frame, remembering how he had built this office with his own hands. The first step towards a dream that was crushed when Lyrable and Talula entered his world. Now she had disappeared into the Mexican wilderness, sold to a brothel, and he was left a broken shadow in a warehouse with no future. Xavier carried out his revenge cold, calculating, ruthless, and now he was ready to leave. The phone rang in his pocket, and he answered without looking at the screen. "Rain, this is Hank." The old carpenter's voice was hoarse, but warm. "Are you sure you're leaving?" "That's right, Hank," Xavier said, looking out the window at the pickup truck already loaded with his things. "It's time." "It's a shame," Hank sighed. The company was your soul. Where to now? To the north, he answered, without going into details. I want silence. Well, good luck, boss, Hank said after a pause. If anything happens, call me. You were the best I've worked with. Thank you, Hank, Xavier nodded. Take care of yourself. He hung up the call and left the office, closing the door for the last time. He left the keys to the new owner and sold the house, the same one where Lurable betrayed him a week ago. Austin was no longer his city. He got into the pickup truck, glanced at the empty street, and drove to the lawyer, the last thing before leaving. In the lawyer's office, a cramped space with bookshelves and the smell of old leather, Xavier signed the papers to change his name. He chose Jasper Wolf, sonorous, sharp, like the howl of a wolf in the mountains. The lawyer, an older man with bushy eyebrows, looked at him over his glasses. Jasper Wolf, then? He said, holding out the documents. Unusual. Why are you changing? I want to start from scratch, Xavier replied, signing. The old name is too heavy. I understand, the lawyer nodded, putting away the papers. After everything that happened with your wife. I heard she disappeared. Yes, Xavier said, his voice level. Her affairs don't concern me anymore. The lawyer shrugged his shoulders without asking any further questions. New documents will be available in a week, he said. Good luck, Mr. Wolf. Thank you, Xavier nodded, shaking his hand. He walked outside, feeling the name Xavier Rain fall off like old skin. Jasper Wolf was him now, a man without a past, without chains. He got into his pickup truck and drove north, leaving Austin in the rearview mirror. The road stretched through Texas, then through Colorado, and finally, 2 days later, he crossed the border into Montana. The ranch he bought was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by pine trees and mountains whose peaks were lost in the clouds. The house was simple one-story, with wooden walls and a wide veranda facing west. Xavier found him through an advertisement, paying in cash from the money that was left after the sale of the company. There were no neighbors here, only silence, broken by the cries of eagles and the rustle of the wind. He parked the pickup on the porch and unloaded a bag of clothes and a toolbox, everything he had taken with him. The inside of the house smelled of wood and dust. Xavier walked through the rooms, checking the windows, the fireplace, the old sofa left by the previous owner. This was his refuge, a place where he could forget labeled Talula, all the hell he had been through. He threw his bag into the bedroom and walked out onto the veranda, carrying a bottle of whiskey he had bought on the way. The sun was already setting, painting the sky crimson and gold, and Xavier sat down in an old chair, looking at the sunset. He took a sip of whiskey, feeling the warmth spreading through his chest. Lurabelle was a shadow in the past. The newspapers forgot her. The police closed the case, and she disappeared into the Mexican night, somewhere in a brothel he didn't want to think about. Talula remained in Austin, broken, crippled, living in a wheelchair, with no hope of a normal life. Xavier remembered his screams in the warehouse, the blood on the floor, and the corner of his lips twitched into a faint smile. The revenge was complete. He took another sip, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. Silence enveloped him, and for the first time in months he felt peace. Jasper Wolf was not Xavier Rain. That man died somewhere between a bedroom in Austin and a warehouse off the highway. Jasper was free, clean, like this air, like this sunset. He placed the bottle on the veranda railing and leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The wind moved the pine trees, and their whisper was the only sound in his new world. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.